big story, isn't it?
Oh, my word.
The question we're asking is, will Newcastle become a Premier League superpower? Loads of you getting involved in this. 55% of you going yes, but it's quite split. Bear in mind how many people voted.
They were absolutely buzzing outside St James's Park, weren't they? Mike Ashley's 14-year tenure finally coming to an end. The Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund buying a club for £300 million.
Thereafter, they've got to be thinking now, soon, they have to win a trophy in Newcastle. With the backing they've got, the ownership they've got, and that wonderful, wonderful support that follows them everywhere, they've got to win something.
Despite their recent lack of success, Newcastle United's legacy has remained strong, and their passionate supporters have continued to stand by the club for over 6 decades. That's one hell of a loyal fan base. Even with very little success in recent times, the club still managed to feature legendary figures like Alan Shearer, who holds the record for the most goals scored in the Premier League.
They've got to win something.
And the legislation and the rules and the closing of circles around APT, which were specifically brought in after the Newcastle purchase, have hampered the opportunity for Newcastle to do what Manchester City did and what Chelsea did in 2003 with the arrival of Abramovich inside the Premier League. The following season, they performed brilliantly. They were the side everyone wanted to watch because they were so exciting. They got into the Champions League that season last year. And now we're at a stage now where Newcastle, they cannot do what others have been able to do. And the reasons why they cannot do it is because the rules have been tightened. The consequences of breaches are no longer financial. I feel sorry for them to some extent a little bit, as much as I would feel sorry for any club that has the right to want to be ambitious. The challenge now is what does Eddie do?
I think the whole transfer window has just been a bit boring. PSR is kind of strangling clubs, aren't they?
Yeah.
PSR, what does it stand for? Preventing successful rebuilds? Protecting selective rivals? Premier suppression rules? Whatever you call it, one thing's for sure. Newcastle's got money, but the Premier League won't let them spend it. The Premier League's Profit and Sustainability Rules, or PSR, were designed to promote financial stability in English football. Clubs can only incur a maximum loss of £105 million over a 3-year period. Sounds fair, right? Well, not quite. Because in reality, these rules disproportionately affect clubs like Newcastle United, who have wealthy owners but are prevented from using their financial strength to grow. Today, we'll explore why PSR is holding Newcastle back, while clubs like Chelsea and Manchester City were able to build super teams in the past without the same restrictions. Like and subscribe. Newcastle United was taken over by a Saudi-backed consortium in 2021. This takeover provided the club with massive financial resources, making them one of the richest teams in the world. But despite their wealth, Newcastle is being forced to restrict spending, while other clubs like Chelsea have been splashing the cash without consequence. In the past 3 seasons, Newcastle spent around £384 million on new signings. That might sound like a lot, but Chelsea has spent nearly 4 times that amount. So why is Newcastle being held back? Like and subscribe. The answer lies in revenue limitations. Newcastle's commercial income is still growing, but PSR regulations prevent them from spending at the same level as clubs that have had decades to build revenue streams.
The problem for Newcastle, and the sustainability part of this argument, what is more sustainable than Newcastle United, given who owns them? So what is it that you're doing by stopping Newcastle from spending the way they choose to be able to build their football club the way they want to? Have they saved anybody?
You're enforcing the governance that's already in place.
But what was but what is the purpose of it? What have we achieved? What have they achieved by this governance? Have they created anything better? What they've created is contraventions of rules. Ultimately, people spending money that are being sanctioned as a result of it. People not investing in football, and the actual spend pattern slowing down, which I'm quite for at times. But actually, what it's doing is Newcastle are sat there now. How do Newcastle, Jim, get from 350 million turnover, if they're at that level, to 700 like Man City? The runway's been shut.
Yes,
it was shut latterly on Man City. It was never shut on Chelsea, so Chelsea could do it.
Let's take a step back and compare this situation to Chelsea and Manchester City. When Roman Abramovich took over Chelsea in 2003, he pumped in huge amounts of money, allowing the club to spend freely. Over the last decade, Chelsea has spent £2.03 billion on transfers, winning multiple trophies in the process. Likewise, Manchester City, under Sheikh Mansour's ownership, built one of the most dominant teams in football history by spending big in the early years. The key difference? These clubs were allowed to operate in an era before strict PSR enforcement. By the time these financial rules were tightened, they had already solidified their place at the top. Newcastle, on the other hand, is being blocked from doing the same, essentially keeping them in a financial straitjacket while the traditional big clubs continue to dominate. In the most recent transfer window, Chelsea led spending with £219.6 million, while Newcastle's spending was far more controlled. Over the last 5 years, Chelsea's net spend sits at a massive £783.58 million, compared to Newcastle's more measured approach since their 2021 takeover. Yet, despite spending responsibly, Newcastle still faces scrutiny and financial limitations under PSR. This is where the hypocrisy becomes clear. PSR is supposed to prevent clubs from losing too much money, yet it disproportionately punishes clubs trying to invest in growth. Newcastle is forced to spend less, not because they don't have money, but because the rules say they aren't allowed to. Meanwhile, clubs with historically higher revenues can spend freely without hitting the same barriers. This system maintains the status quo, ensuring that the elite clubs stay on top, while emerging clubs struggle to break through. Critics argue that the Premier League's financial regulations are anti-competitive, designed to keep new challengers at bay.
I think there should be progressive taxation. If you want to spend above guidelines, then you should pay a taxation that kicks back down into the pyramid or into the Premier League in of itself. So if you want to spend way and above what it is that you're allowed to do from governance, you don't get sanctioned points-wise. You get some sort of progressive taxation that benefits the pyramid or benefits everybody else as a result of it.
And you pay that taxation.
Well, of course you do. You build
duty,
it.
It filters down the
build it
pyramid.
Would that be different than what you suggested a while ago in terms of a dispensation in the first year or 2 years of a new owner having the...
Alongside, there are two solutions, isn't there? You can skin the cat two ways. You can suggest to people that ultimately, for the first 3 years of your ownership, you are allowed to spend within a certain framework an opportunity to build your football club.
Even Newcastle manager Eddie Howe has admitted that PSR constraints may force the club to sell key players just to stay compliant. And fans have taken notice with even small moments, like Howe arriving at a press conference in a golf buggy. Meanwhile, pundits like Simon Jordan have called out the unfair nature of these rules, highlighting how Newcastle is being prevented from competing on a level playing field.
And the legislation and the rules and the closing of circles around APT, which were specifically brought in after the Newcastle purchase, have hampered the opportunity for Newcastle to do what Manchester City did and what Chelsea did in 2003 with the arrival of Abramovich inside the Premier League. The following season, they performed brilliantly. They were the side everyone wanted to watch because they were so exciting. They got into the Champions League that season last year. And now we're at a stage now where Newcastle, they cannot do what others have been able to do. And the reasons why they cannot do it is because the rules have been tightened. The consequences of breaches are no longer financial. I feel sorry for them to some extent a little bit, as much as I would feel sorry for any club that has the right to want to be ambitious. The challenge now is what does Eddie do?
At its core, the PSR system is flawed. While financial stability is important, the way the rules are currently applied only benefits the clubs that are already at the top. Newcastle isn't asking for special treatment. They're simply asking for the chance to compete fairly. Until the rules are adjusted, ambitious clubs like Newcastle will continue to be held back, while the traditional giants maintain their dominance. So, what do you think? Is PSR helping the game, or is it just another way to protect the Premier League's established elite? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more football insights.